Picture this: 40,000 men standing in perfect formation, armed with weapons that conquered the known world. They're about to face an army half their size. They've never been beaten when they fight like this. In 3 hours, they'll be dead or running for their lives. What went wrong? June of 168 BC, the Macedonian plains baked under summer sun. Along the banks of the Elpius River, two armies faced each other across shallow water. On one side, King Perseus commanded the largest phalanx ever assembled, 20,000 pike-wielding soldiers, plus another 20,000 support troops. The inheritors of Alexander the Great's legacy, the bloodline that once ruled from Greece to India. Across the river stood Rome, 29,000 soldiers, smaller force, different approach. For 3 years, these two powers had danced around each other, probing, retreating, testing. Perseus thought he was buying time. He believed Rome might lose interest in this distant conflict and go home. He didn't understand what he was dealing with. Rome didn't lose interest. Rome didn't quit. Rome consumed everything in its path until nothing remained. Now the dance was over. Two completely different ways of making war were about to collide head-on. The Phalanx, an ancient system that had crushed Persian empires and marched with Alexander across Asia, versus the Legion, a newer machine built for one purpose: killing efficiently and adapting to anything. Only one would walk away. The other would vanish from history. Let's talk about what Perseus inherited. When his father Philip V died in 179 BC, Perseus didn't just get a throne, he got an impossible situation. Macedonia wasn't weak because it lacked soldiers or gold. It was hollowed out from the inside. That fire that drove Alexander to the ends of the earth? Gone. That hunger that transformed rough mountain warriors into world conquerors? Extinct. What remained was pride, memory, and the phalanx itself. 16 ranks of men locked together, shoulder pressed against shoulder, 18-foot pikes jutting forward like a forest made of iron. This formation had broken every army it ever faced. Perseus believed it would do so again. Not because he was stupid, because he'd never seen it fail. None of them had. But here's the thing about inherited glory: it makes you blind. Rome had already humiliated Perseus's father, stripped away territories, forced Macedonia from regional superpower to minor client state. Philip spent his final years planning revenge, rebuilding armies, stockpiling resources. When he died, Perseus picked up that plan and ran with it. He would restore Macedonian greatness, drive Rome out of Greece, make the world remember whose descendants still walked the earth. Rome watched all this with cold, patient eyes. The Senate had no personal hatred for this young king. They simply didn't tolerate rivals. When Greek city-states started complaining about Macedonian interference, when Roman allies whispered warnings about Perseus growing stronger, the Senate listened, then decided. In 171 BC, they declared war. The first 2 years shocked everyone. Perseus fought brilliantly, using mountains for defense, cavalry for mobility, avoiding any decisive battle. Roman commanders grew frustrated, marched armies north, fought and accomplished nothing. Perseus remained undefeated, treasury full, phalanx intact. Then Rome sent in Lucius Aemilius Paulus, 60 years old, Spanish campaign veteran, a man who'd lost sons, tasted defeat, learned that war isn't about glory, it's about breaking the enemy's will. He didn't underestimate opponents, didn't believe in easy victories. When he arrived in Macedonia, he studied Perseus's strategy and saw through it immediately. This wasn't strength. This was delay dressed up as tactics. Paulus changed everything. He pushed through mountain passes Perseus thought were secure, outflanked defensive positions, forced Perseus into a corner, fight or surrender northern Macedonia entirely. Perseus chose to fight, and he marched his 40,000 to the plains near Pydna, open ground where his phalanx would have room to deploy properly, where terrain favored traditional battle. Both commanders understood what this meant. No more maneuvering, no more delays. One afternoon would decide everything. Let's break down what each side brought to this fight. Perseus commanded 40,000 men. The core was that 20,000-man phalanx, cream of Macedonian manhood, each soldier trained from boyhood in the discipline of the sarissa, that 18-foot pike. Supported by Thracian allies, Greek mercenaries, cavalry on the wings. Paulus had 29,000 Romans and Italian allies organized into legions. Each legion was 4,800 men divided into maniples, small independent units that could fight alone, adapt to circumstances, exploit opportunities. The Roman soldier carried a gladius, a short stabbing sword perfect for close-quarters killing, plus 2 weighted javelins designed to bend on impact, so enemies couldn't throw them back. See the fundamental difference? The phalanx was one massive organism, powerful when it held together, vulnerable the instant it broke apart. The legion was multiple smaller organisms, each weaker individually but adaptable, capable of flowing around obstacles and reforming. Nobody had seen these systems collide at full strength before. Greeks believed the phalanx was unbeatable. Romans trusted flexibility. Theory and prejudice filled the gaps where actual knowledge should have been. The answer was about to come. The Elpais River wasn't much of an obstacle. Narrow, shallow, barely a stream in early summer heat. But it marked the boundary between the armies. For 3 days they watched each other across that water. Paulus didn't rush. He understood that time favored Rome. His supply lines stretched back to the coast, but they were solid. Perseus's kingdom was smaller, resources finite. The Macedonian king needed a crushing victory. Paulus just needed to destroy the phalanx. Patience was a weapon. On the Roman side, engineers surveyed the ground beyond the river, mostly flat but broken by small gullies, scattered stones, the uneven surface of abandoned farmland. Paulus studied those irregularities and smiled. The phalanx demanded smooth ground. Rough terrain would tear it apart. Perseus deployed carefully. Phalanx in the center. 20,000 men in 16 ranks, front bristling with pike points, cavalry on the wings, light infantry behind for support and harassment. The Macedonian camp buzzed with confidence. They'd heard stories from veterans about enemy formations shattering against the phalanx like waves against cliffs. They believed those stories. They'd seen them happen. But none of them had fought Romans. The evening before battle, Paulus performed ritual sacrifices. The omens came back unfavorable. He ignored them. He'd seen too many battles to trust interpretations of animal guts over the training of his soldiers. But he kept the bad omens secret. No point shaking confidence before the fight. That night, a lunar eclipse turned the moon blood red. Soldiers on both sides watched the sky darken and whispered about divine anger. Perseus's men saw it as a sign against Rome. Roman soldiers saw it as a sign against Macedonia. Both were wrong, and the gods, if they were watching at all, didn't pick favorites. This battle would be decided by training, discipline, and the merciless logic of terrain. As dawn approached, Paulus gave simple orders. Cross at first light. Engage the phalanx. Test its strength. When the ground breaks its cohesion, pour into the gaps. Simple, brutal, effective. Perseus woke to reports of Roman movement. He armored himself, rode along the phalanx ranks, saw strong, disciplined men who believed in their king and their system. He told them they would prove Macedonian superiority today. Told them Rome would learn what Alexander's heirs could do. He believed his own words. That was his last mistake. The battle started with an accident. Early morning, a Roman foraging party crossed the river looking for water. Macedonian scouts spotted them. Then a skirmish erupted, javelins thrown, stones slung, men shouting. Within minutes, what should have been a minor clash escalated. Both sides pushed forward to support their men. Perseus saw the developing fight and made his call. The moment had come. He ordered the phalanx forward. 20,000 men began to move. The sound alone was terrifying. A grinding, rhythmic thunder as thousands of hobnailed boots struck earth in unison. The phalanx advanced slowly, deliberately, maintaining perfect alignment. Each man kept his shoulder pressed against his neighbor's shield, his sarissa angled forward at exactly the correct height. The front 5 ranks held pikes horizontal, creating a wall of iron points. The ranks behind angled weapons upward, a bristling canopy that could deflect missiles and intimidate even the bravest enemy. Still, to the Romans watching from across the river, it must have looked like a forest had learned to walk. Paulus hadn't wanted the battle to start this way, but he didn't freeze when plans changed. He ordered the legions forward. Trumpets blared. The 1st and 3rd legions waded into the river, water splashing around their knees, shields high against arrows and javelins. The phalanx reached the southern bank and kept advancing. Perseus rode behind the formation, watching his weapon deploy. This was maximum danger. Crossing water could disorder ranks, break cohesion. But his men were veterans. They maintained formation even splashing through shallow water, pikes never wavering. The Roman vanguard climbed the northern bank and formed shield walls. Centurions shouted orders. Maniples deployed in checkerboard formation. Roman discipline held. But the men could see what was coming. A moving wall of spear points, each pike longer than a man was tall, thousands of them advancing in perfect synchronization. Then the phalanx struck. The initial impact was catastrophic for Rome. The sarissas reached far beyond Roman swords. Legionaries couldn't get close enough to use their weapons. Pike points punched through shields, found gaps in armor, drove men backward. The 1st Legion's front ranks reeled, men fell, others stumbled over bodies. The phalanx kept advancing, grinding forward, unstoppable. Roman officers screamed for maniples to hold. Some did. Others broke and ran. The Macedonian phalanx pushed deeper into the Roman line, and for 30 minutes, it looked like Perseus would achieve the impossible. A decisive victory that would change the war's entire course. Paulus watched from higher ground, face expressionless. He'd expected this. The phalanx's initial charge was always devastating, but he'd also studied the terrain. The ground ahead wasn't parade ground smooth. It was farmland broken by small rises and depressions, scattered with stones. The phalanx was advancing into a trap it couldn't see. Then the ground began its work. The Macedonian right wing advanced faster than the center. Eager commanders, sensing victory, pushed their sections forward at quicker pace. The left wing, facing different terrain and stiffer resistance, lagged behind. The phalanx began to curve. Small gaps appeared between sections. At first, minor spaces. A man could slip through, nothing more. The phalanx was designed to absorb such imperfections. Commanders shouted for men to close ranks, but the ground wouldn't cooperate. A shallow gully, invisible until the formation was nearly upon it, forced one section to slow. Another section marching over flatter ground kept its momentum. The gap widened. 20 feet, 30 feet, an opening formed in the iron hedge. Paulus saw it. He'd been waiting for it. He turned to his tribune and gave the order, "Into the gaps." Roman maniples, trained to fight as independent units, didn't need the entire legion to move as one. Centurions identified the openings in the Macedonian formation and led their men forward, not in massive waves, but in swift, precise thrusts. Small units of legionaries poured into the gaps, pushing between sections of the phalanx where the sarissas couldn't reach them. Inside the phalanx, chaos erupted. The Macedonian pikeman was trained for one type of fight. Standing shoulder to shoulder, pike extended forward, maintaining formation. When enemies got past the pike points, when combat became close and personal, the sarissa became a liability. Too long to wield effectively in tight quarters. Macedonian soldiers tried to drop their pikes and draw swords, but they were packed too tightly. Men stumbled over discarded weapons. The rear ranks, still pushing forward, collided with front ranks trying to turn and face threats from the sides. The Roman gladius was designed for exactly this type of fighting. Short, deadly, perfect for stabbing in confined spaces. Legionaries pressed into the gaps, shields locked, swords thrusting upward into exposed bellies and throats. Macedonian soldiers, squeezed together by their own formation's density, couldn't effectively defend themselves. They fell in clumps, bodies piling up, making footing even more treacherous. Perseus watched his perfect weapon come apart. He screamed orders, sent officers forward to restore cohesion. But the phalanx's strength was also its weakness. Once disordered, it couldn't easily reform under pressure. What had been a single massive organism was now fragments. Sections of pikemen surrounded and isolated, fighting desperate individual battles they'd never been trained to win. On the Macedonian left, one section of the phalanx still held cohesion and continued advancing, driving Roman maniples backward. For a moment, it seemed this fragment might break through and threaten Paulus's position. But the Roman commander simply redirected reserves. Fresh cohorts hit the Macedonian left from the flank, going where the phalanx couldn't bring its pikes to bear. The formation crumbled. The cavalry on Macedonian wings, seeing the center collapsing, tried to intervene. Thracian horsemen charged Roman flanks, hoping to relieve pressure on the phalanx. They met Roman and Italian cavalry in brutal close-quarters melee. Horses screamed, riders fell. Neither side gained decisive advantage, but the Macedonian cavalry couldn't break through to save the infantry. The battle had been decided. Now came the slaughter. Macedonian soldiers began throwing down their pikes and running. The Romans didn't pursue immediately. They methodically worked through the phalanx fragments, killing or capturing isolated groups of pikemen. Those who fled found themselves running uphill, exhausted, weighed down by armor. Roman light infantry and cavalry hunted them down. Perseus, watching from horseback, realized the battle was lost. His officers begged him to flee. For a moment, he hesitated, watching his army die. The legacy of Alexander being dismantled pike by pike, man by man. Then self-preservation overcame pride. He turned his horse north and spurred into a gallop. His personal guard followed. Behind them, the Macedonian army ceased to exist as a fighting force. The killing continued until nightfall. Roman soldiers, disciplined even in victory, didn't descend into complete chaos, but they showed no mercy. Macedonian soldiers who surrendered were taken prisoner. Those who resisted died where they stood. The plains near Pydna became a graveyard. Roman casualties, perhaps 100 dead. Some accounts suggest even lower. Macedonian losses, 20,000 dead, 11,000 captured. The Phalanx, the military system that conquered the known world, had been annihilated in less than 3 hours. As darkness fell, Roman soldiers moved across the battlefield, stripping corpses of weapons and armor, gathering the wounded, counting the dead. Paulus walked among the legions, congratulating his centurions, honoring men who'd fought well. He didn't celebrate. He'd seen too much death to take joy in it. This had been a necessary lesson in violence. Nothing more. The Macedonian camp was taken without resistance. Inside, the Romans found Perseus's treasury, his royal regalia, his correspondence, evidence of diplomatic overtures to other Greek states, attempts to build an anti-Roman coalition, maps and plans for campaigns that would never happen. Perseus himself rode through the night heading for the mountain fortress of Samothrace. He'd be captured weeks later, betrayed by allies who no longer saw profit in supporting a defeated king. He'd march in Paulus's triumph through Rome, wearing his royal purple, a living symbol of Macedonian submission. He'd die in captivity, the last king of Alexander's line, reduced to a cautionary tale. The kingdom of Macedon was abolished. Rome divided its territory into 4 puppet republics, forbidden to make war or contract marriages across their borders. The Macedonian monarchy, which had endured for nearly 2 centuries, which had given the world Philip II and Alexander the Great, ceased to exist. Within a generation, even those puppet republics would be absorbed directly into Roman control, becoming the province of Macedonia. On the battlefield at Pydna, as stars emerged above the carnage, the lesson was already clear to those who understood warfare's brutal arithmetic. The Phalanx, magnificent in its discipline and terrifying in its power, was obsolete. It couldn't adapt to rough terrain, couldn't recover from disorder, couldn't fight the kind of flexible, opportunistic battle that Roman legions had perfected. The age of the Phalanx had ended in the dust and blood of a summer afternoon. The age of Rome was only beginning. When dawn came to Pydna, silence hung over the field where 2 military systems had collided. One army had walked away. The other would never march again. In that silence, the future of the Mediterranean world had been written in the broken bodies of men who believed their way of war could never fail. They'd been wrong. Here's what gets me about this battle. It wasn't about courage. The Macedonians were brave. It wasn't about numbers. They had more men. It wasn't even about equipment or training. Both sides were professionals. It was about adaptability, the ability to respond when things don't go according to plan. The Romans built a system that could bend without breaking. The Macedonians built a system that was perfect until it wasn't. And when perfection met reality, perfection shattered. That's the lesson of Pydna. Not that one culture was superior to another. Not that the Romans were destined to rule. But that rigid systems, no matter how powerful, will eventually meet circumstances they can't handle. And when they do, they don't just lose. They cease to exist. 20,000 men walked onto that field believing in a system that had never failed. 3 hours later, that system was dead, and most of them were too. History kept no record of their names. If you found this deep dive into ancient warfare compelling, hit that like button. Subscribe for more explorations of the battles that shaped our world. And drop a comment. What military system do you think was the most effective in history? Let's debate it.